need support staff to clear the room. Stand up and walk. Now.
Hey everyone, welcome to a special episode of the Watch Podcast. What we did here is take all of my conversations with Amanda Dobbins about season 4 of The Crown and put them all together in one episode. Over the last couple of Watch episodes, Amanda and I have been chatting about the episodes from season 4. So we did 1 through 3, 4 through 6, and then 7 through 10. So we decided to take them all and put them all in one podcast so you can enjoy them over the Thanksgiving weekend. We'll get into my conversation with Amanda. It's about, an hour and a half. You can look at the time codes to switch around and pick. In the latter part of the podcast, we kind of had a more general conversation about where The Crown is at, where it started and where it's going in the death of Princess Diana years that are going to probably address, obviously, in the next 2 seasons, the remaining 2 seasons of the show. So let's get into my conversation with Amanda Dobbins. I am joined, what is now becoming a tradition unlike any other. They say that about the Masters. I'm talking to the master of The Crown. It's Amanda Dobbins.
Hello, Chris. I'm elated.
Yeah, it came and it's beautiful. It's here and it's beautiful. It's season 4 of The Crown. I was a latecomer to this show. I was resistant at first. It took me a little while, and it's slowly become one of my favorite things on television, probably of this decade. I think season 4 is remarkable. Amanda and I have decided we're gonna get as much out of this as we possibly can. So we're gonna do 3 episodes at a time, and then so 3, and then 4. Amanda, you are sticking to that in terms of your watching as well, right?
Yes, I've only seen 3 episodes of The Crown as of this recording, which I don't want to just completely air myself out on this podcast, but I need people to understand that pop culturally speaking, this is the season of television I've been waiting my whole life for.
Yes.
And that's not a joke, and that's not an exaggeration. I have just a very deep and somewhat unexplained, frankly, interest in the royal family, and specifically the Diana years. I have read a book by Tina Brown called The Diana Chronicles, which is a biography of the late Princess Diana and really about this celebrity and media culture that surrounded her in the 80s. More times really than I can count. I don't know why I've read this book so much. I think it is a fantastic book about celebrity and media, and I would recommend it to anyone who's interested in The Crown. But I just know too much about everything that's happening here, and so have been waiting for years and possibly decades for it. And I have to tell you, so far it lives up to that insane expectation, which right. I'm amazed by.
So when you were going into this, was there a part of you, what was the thing you would be most skeptical about their ability to pull off? Was there anything that you were like, the thing is that was it Emma Corrin? Was it the idea of like who they were going to cast as Diana? Because obviously there's going to be a pretty quick changeover of acting duties here.
Right.
Or was it maybe just like the capturing the fame around her, which I think we're only just getting into by Fairy Tale, the 3rd episode?
Yeah, I think the Diana of it all and who you're going to put in that role is difficult, though. I think it's probably more difficult for people of our age than it would be for, say, Kaya or even for Emma Corrin herself, who I believe was 2 when Princess Diana died, and so has no memory of her. And right. You and I have a memory of her that is 25 years old at this point. So even our memory of that media sensation, it is possibly a bit easier to recreate.
Well, it's like we have memories of our memories almost.
Exactly.
Like it's like we remember it being a thing on television. We remember people mourning her death. We remember Candle in the Wind. We remember all the stuff around her. The thing that's been amazing about watching this season so far is it is essentially like my lifespan. It's like now we are in but more kind of personally, this is some of the stuff that's happening even outside of the royals with Thatcher. And we're going to get into Gillian Anderson's portrayal of Margaret Thatcher and Peter Morgan's portrayal of Margaret Thatcher is my dad. My dad was British. He moved to the United States in the late 60s, but remained very close with his family over there and has very, very specific opinions about Margaret Thatcher, which are not positive at all.
Correct.
And I don't know if you were coming to this show blind, if you would understand the levels of hatred people had for Thatcher, like a lot of people had for Thatcher.
That's certainly not. And we'll talk more about that specifically in episode 2. But, to your question of like what I was concerned about, whether what they would get right. Not necessarily what they would get right, but I was very curious about just how the show would take sides. And a show like this with this many characters and this much drama, as this season certainly has, if you don't know the story of Charles and Diana, I mean, I guess spoiler alert for the rest of this podcast, but like also you're on a wild ride.
Yeah.
And also if you don't
I
know
watched The Crown, but don't care about Charles and Diana.
But also, if you like don't know the story of Margaret Thatcher in the 80s in England, like spoiler alert, you're in for a wild ride. And it's always been so interesting to me to try to parse the question if like how this show feels about the crown itself. And obviously it's royalist, and obviously it's ultimately because the queen is at the center of the show, it is empathetic with her. And I think she probably comes off better than not. But now that everyone's kind of in the great game together, which is really what this decade is about between Margaret Thatcher and Diana and the queen at the center, it's really interesting to see where the show's allegiances are and how it interprets these moments that we knew about from reading the newspaper or have like maybe become lore in our memories, but how they're presenting the version of events is really interesting. And so far has not like 100% aligned with my understanding, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's a richer text.
There's also the danger of poisoning people against the characters that I think that the thing that I'm most fascinated by is Peter Morgan's obviously a very empathetic writer, and he's one of our best television writers, one of our best dramatic writers. And you can feel as these first 3 episodes go, just a kind of souring on Charles a little bit. I think, there's a degree to which he is helpless. And when I refer to these people, by the way, I am personally entirely referring to their quasi-fictional representation in this show. I don't really have a ton of knowledge about these people, but if you watch the previous season, I think I would go as far as say is that you'd be pretty cold not to kind of fall in love with Charles, or at least feel very deeply for him and feel very deeply for how his life got sort of taken from him in a lot of ways. Now, maybe not anywhere near as badly as it did for generations of English people in lots of different ways, but the way in which his life was not his own is tragic, and I think a lot of people were like, for lack of a better term, Team Charles in a lot of ways. And then as you get into this season, he's more and more of a bastard.
Yes, I would agree with that. And I think even in the last season, I was surprised by the extent to which I was Team Charles. I credit a lot of it to Josh O'Connor's performance. I think he is extraordinary, but you're completely right that the portrayal, especially in the second half of season 3, there's that just absolutely tremendous episode about him going to Wales and searching for like some sort of family and understanding and sense of purpose that he cannot find at his home. And even there's that tension of that he has to go to Wales, which is a country that is protesting its British rule.
Yeah.
Like throughout the episode, there's that tension of like, these people don't even want him, but it's the only place he can find acceptance. And, throughout the season, and especially the Camilla of it all, which has echoes of the Margaret and Captain Townsend, I think his name is, but the marriage she wasn't allowed to pursue in season 1. And that's another interesting thing about this season. We've covered enough time where you're starting to see echoes, and they're echoing certain scenes as well, and like shots as well as themes, which I think is so exciting. But yeah, you felt bad for him. And now it's just kind of curdling, if that makes any sense. And I think that there are moments of real empathy and also moments of him being like a real jerk.
Yeah.
And
careless with people's lives. Yeah.
Yeah. And entitled. And one thing that's really stuck out to me in the first 3 episodes, obviously the royal family's entitlement and cluelessness has always been on display in these seasons, but it's starting to become more of like a character trait and more obvious. They're not really putting anyone down in any specific way, but if you start connecting the dots between what you see the queen doing and some of the choices she's making, and what you see Charles doing and some of the choices that he's making, and these people are just divorced from reality, which is absolutely the case, and I think increasingly the case as the years go on.
The dedication that this show has to essentially telling Elizabeth's story. The idea that the crown is essentially Elizabeth's story, that, there are these framing devices, whether it's the prime ministers who come to meet with her or whether, it's her extended family. But ultimately, that's going to be what this show is. We talked about this a little bit last season. As Elizabeth gets more and more static, how does that affect the show itself? What have you felt in that regard for the first few episodes?
I thought it was very funny in her kind of first scene, with Gillian Anderson as Margaret Thatcher. And she's just comic relief. Yeah. And I think she's very funny. And a little bit is because Olivia Colman is like one of the great actresses, but also comedic actresses of our time. And so she's playing it for laughs. And you kind of see a little bit, I did wonder how much of the character is being written to her, and her strengths. But I think in a lot of ways, this season, and I've only seen 3 episodes, so I can't really be spoiling it, will be about the Queen in the ways that she is eclipsed. Because I think the story of the 80s, certainly in the UK, but certainly in the royal family, is you have kind of the twin rising sons of Margaret Thatcher and Princess Diana, who take all of the limelight and attention and kind of wreak havoc. And the Queen, who is supposed to be like a stable force in the center of the show, is like definitely none of those things, or can't be any of those things. And so in some ways, it's about her in absence or in reaction. And happily, Olivia Colman is really good at reaction. But it'll be interesting to see as this season goes on.
So we can start talking about episode 1 if you'd like. That was that's the gold stick, and that's where we meet Thatcher. And the episode itself is largely concerned with the sort of the death of Mountbatten and the reaction to that. And I think it sets up a pretty useful structure that the show, I think, continues at least through these first few episodes, where they essentially do 2 episodes within each episode. There's the Margaret episode, and then there's the royal family episode, and it's brought together by some sort of thematic cohesion, whether it's a stag hunt or, whatever. I only know kind of like my dad's version of it, and a lot of what I've read in, frankly, novels rather than history about England at the time. But you really do get the impression that Thatcher comes along and unwinds / dissuades people of all these notions of what it means to be English, and not necessarily in a pleasant way, but both the royals and the sort of the lords of the land and their ideas about what their role in society is and what kind of sway they have over society. And at that same time, the more blue collar working class trade unionist ideas about what it means to go to work in England and what you sort of deserve for doing so. And Margaret comes through and just kind of wipes away all of it with these austerity measures and all this kind of fiscal philosophy that she applies to England. What did you think of the first episode?
Yeah, I should clarify that I might be a Diana scholar, but I'm definitely not a scholar of British economic history or political history, which says a lot about me. And once again, I'm telling on myself. But yeah, I would say that my understanding, primarily from novels and history, is that the Margaret Thatcher project was undoing the post-war project in Britain, and she is not looked upon kindly for that. At least socially. And so I found myself in episode 1, Gillian Anderson walks in, and obviously Margaret Thatcher had a particular way of speaking and a particular way of dressing and a particular hairdo that others have parodied or recreated, as the case may be, and even won Oscars for it in the case of Meryl Streep. So, but she comes in and you're kind of like, okay, this seems a little bit, not like an SNL sketch, but I'm going to need a minute to ease into this.
Yeah.
And then I think what she's doing is pretty remarkably nuanced, to the point that later on I was like, oh, wait, am I not supposed to completely see her as evil incarnate? And again, that's the thing I was talking about, of trying to figure out the motivations, but also where this show sees the motivations. She plays it's kind of expository for her in episode 1, right? Because then she shows up and is trying to, and obviously she'll be a major character, but also kind of sets the political scene in the UK and its neighbors, which then sets up the Mountbatten death, which is the the center of the episode. Is that something that you knew about before watching this episode?
I knew that he was killed by the IRA. Yeah. Just from my reading about Irish history generally and a little bit interested in the Troubles. Like, I was pretty aware that happened. It was also, I believe, not spoiled, but they had pictures of Charles Dance filming that scene in the Daily Mail.
Oh, did
and they did a big Mountbatten's death scene. And I was like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Don't get too attached to Charles Dance yet again.
Yeah, that's true.
But I thought that scene was sort of illustrative of what we're talking about. If you read about Mountbatten, he has some strikes in the con column. You know what I mean? I mean, he is essentially the avatar of British colonialism and may or may not have participated in planning a coup, So
yes.
he in the show itself, I think he is seen as a passive participant in that, who gets a rap on the knuckles, if I remember correctly, for his role in possibly overthrowing Wilson. But you are left to feel the massive hole in Charles's life when Mountbatten dies, which is this complicated thing that this show does over and over again.
Especially because of that absolutely just vicious scene between Philip, as played by Tobias Menzies, and Charles, which was I was a little surprised by, because the show isn't usually that obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even want to say that it's obvious, but Philip says to Charles exactly what he's feeling, which, I've been led to believe is not what British people do. And he's definitely helped by alcohol and in the wake of a loss. But he's just yeah, you supplanted me. And I guess it's not completely obvious, because he's clearly talking about how Charles supplanted him in Dickie, in Mountbatten's life. But it's definitely also about how he's going to be the king and he's more important. And it's, about Philip's whole, I'm just the sidekick issues, which sure. But once again,
he's a soldier who never really had a war.
Yeah.
He's all these things. Yeah.
Right. But yes, this show presents it as a tremendous loss, which through everything I've read in terms of the role that he played in that family, I think it was, and it was to Charles as well. I don't know whether this letter that was written is historically accurate, and we'll talk more about how and why Charles decides to marry Diana.
Mm-hmm.
I think the accounts that I've read aren't as straight a line, but
sure.
Of course that's, TV making, and it's probably also just a lot of therapy being done in real time. So good job, everybody. But I did, anyway, I did know that it was coming from the moment that the episode started, because it begins with a voiceover of some sort of IRA broadcast. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And even there, the show, it's where its allegiances are on that one, on the Troubles, we don't really need to get into. But I did think that it was interesting how when they show Mountbatten's funeral, that the broadcast comes back.
Yeah, the 18 taken from and Mountbatten.
Yes.
We got 18 and Mountbatten, referring to
Yes.
the ambush of the British soldiers as well.
Yeah.
It's complicated. I feel like Mountbatten, both in what I've read about him historically and especially in the show, is the connection that the royal family still has to actual governing. Is this person who was actually playing roles in the defense of England, in its projects overseas, its empire building, seemed to have some sort of hand in the shaping of things. And then when he disappears, not only does Charles's nominal father figure disappear, but sort of this connection to, their sphere of influence shrinks considerably after his death, I think.
Yes, absolutely. He's also a connection to empire, as you said, in a really
and they're playing
absurd way.
Ibble Dibble in the sitting room. That's sort of where they wind up,
It is kind of, this show is so good, and I think it's so well written, and I think it finds the humanity and really interesting domestic stories in these people. who we don't have a lot of access to. I think that's tremendous television. But you do watch someone like Mountbatten and you're like, okay, well, he was first a part of the German royal family because back in, the beginning of the century, all the royal families were connected and then no one else survived. And so then they tried to extend the empire this way. I mean, it's another time. It's a little ridiculous.
He's like deciding who gets to be king of Spain because like his cousin wants to be, but it's going to make problems if he...
Preposterous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay, so what did you think of the introduction to Diana? So we get to see her,
dynamite.
All full Shakespeare, peeking around the plant.
I was astonished. I will say that I texted you 8 minutes into watching episode 1 of The Crown last night, and it was after that scene, and I was just like, this show is unbeatable.
Yeah,
it is so good, and that is like pure like symbolic TV, like whatever. Movie making of bringing together the themes and the staging and the visuals and the chemistry. It's all working. It's so well crafted. I honestly don't know if Diana Spencer ever read A Midsummer Night's Dream in real life, but I don't care.
Right.
It was incredible.
I wonder, there's this thing that The Crown does that I think is amazing, which is it spends all of its capital on a relatively small stage. It's like, that scene in that setting with her or some of the things that happen in the next couple of episodes with her kind of whiling away her days while Charles is on these long trips is like so overwhelming in terms of its detail and in terms of its scale and scope. But then they kind of keep it in those doors. Like we see Mountbatten's death, but we don't really get lots of cutaway scenes to different IRA situations or what Thatcher's policies were starting to do. And I think that does kind of dull the impact of understanding some of the damage that she did. But at the same time, when you're in that room and you're watching these two people meet, it feels like the entire universe. Like, and what they choose to cash in on versus what they choose to withhold or skip over is really fascinating to me.
I completely agree. And one thing that I was going to say about these 3 episodes that was not missing for me at all, and forgive me if this is a really, really dumb realization to make in season 4 of a show that I've watched obsessively and have thought about nonstop, but I was like, there's a real contained insular nature to this. This is a show that like is about history and power and England, and it is interested in those themes, but only to the extent that those themes reveal something about these people. It's a people first experiment.
Or how they experience them. Like when you think about Elizabeth going to that town in Wales that's had the landslide, there are plenty of tragedies that have probably occurred during her reign, but she was there for that one. Otherwise, these things are things that are happening on television. These things are the things that are happening on the radio.
Yeah, and especially watching the Diana of it all, because in episode 2 and episode 3, as she's integrated into the family, there is outside these walls just like a massive media storm going on, right? Yeah. And that's how like you and I would have been familiar with it. I mean, we were not really following the news then. I wasn't alive, but we've seen the footage. Like we are familiar with Diana through that media filter, and she is a media creation to some point. And so part of me was like, okay, but like, where is that? Because that was like such a big deal. But that's not the exercise of this show. And I need to not be greedy was the lesson of that.
Let's talk about Balmoral test. Is that a thing?
I mean, I've never been invited, and I certainly don't think I would pass it.
Well, it's definitely a thing with most people where it's like, you have to come meet my parents.
Yeah.
But I just mean, was the idea that prospective spouses were brought to this Scottish castle for a weekend of board games and hunting, and if they pass the muster?
I don't know if it is anything that formal because, even within the context of the episode, the test isn't named, right?
Sure.
It's just kind of like a up and down. But I do think it happened fairly often. Everything that they say about Charles's dating life is like quite true. He was a man about town, as they say. And Diana did make an early trip to Balmoral and was like considered a success. And so that meant that she was suitable. I think, it's their stronghold. It is the place where they go on vacation, even though it doesn't look like a vacation to me. I mean, it is just raining everywhere all the time. And people are like, summer. I love it.
Yeah, I know.
It couldn't be me. But the idea that someone can either sink or swim in those particular circumstances is like definitely how they operate. And that it's not named, and that it's not kind of like that there is the protocol sheet, but you can still get things wrong because you misread it and you're kind of set up to fail. I mean, that's elitism.
That's what happens to Margaret. Is like she shows up in black tie and everybody is like wearing their barber jackets. Yeah.
Sure. And I am not a member of the British upper class, but it's, that's how a lot of privileged people in aristocracies work, right? Is that they set up a bunch of rules that you don't know are there, and then you get kept out because of them.
So this episode does the same thing where it basically, the first half of it is Margaret's experience at Balmoral Castle, and then the second half is Diana's. The thing I wanted to ask you most about is, I wouldn't necessarily call it a flaw in the show, but I would say one of my blank spots as a viewer is understanding the nature of Charles and Camilla's relationship through his courtship with Diana. And I think a little bit of time passes, obviously, between the first episode and the second episode. And he's obviously having these intimate conversations with Camilla, who only ever talks on the phone with the same hairstyle in front of the same fire every time. They definitely got Emerald Fennell to do all of her scenes in a block.
Yeah.
But I think that I was a little thrown off because I was like, are they still seeing one another intimately? Like she's with Andrew. She has a child. She is hiding her child in this show, but
right. So you're asking, are they having sex? And the answer is
I was
yes.
just curious, like, what's the nature of their relationship and how well known was that?
So that is a question that is up for some debate in later years. But and I want to say with everything, I'm relying on the Tina Brown book, the Diana Chronicles, and then the Andrew Morton book about Diana, which was written with Diana's cooperation. So biased, but, at least we know the primary sources. Before they were married, they were very much in contact, and there's no reason to assume that they weren't having sex because everyone was having sex. And I think Andrew Parker Bowles was known to be somewhat promiscuous as well.
Right.
And, in the show itself, when he's on the phone with Mountbatten just before Mountbatten is killed, he says that he and Camilla are meeting up for a couple days, and that's what starts the fight. So I think that I know that later on, for sure, there is this kind of, the nature of their relationship is trying to meet at various fancy homes around the UK, and all of their rich aristocratic friends would loan out their various country estates for them. So, I mean, there's no reason to believe it wasn't happening then as well.
This is the episode that I think we were first asked to really feel sympathy for Margaret because she doesn't understand these customs. I guess we've hinted at this, but how did that make you feel? Was it more like in the moment you were completely invested, and then afterward you were like, wait a second? I don't necessarily think it's Peter Morgan's job to adjudicate who Margaret Thatcher was outside of the reality of the moment he's writing, but it is an interesting conundrum for the viewer.
Okay, so you're talking about Margaret Thatcher and not Princess Margaret, because for a second I thought you were talking about Princess Margaret.
No, Margaret Thatcher.
Though we are supposed to feel bad for Princess Margaret at this point, even though she's just lecturing her on, how to speak and where to sit. That's a very funny scene. Yeah, I think what's most bewildering is that I think the audience is supposed to take Margaret Thatcher's point of view of these people are ridiculous. And there is that kind of climactic scene after she's, they've failed the dinner test, and after she's failed the stalking test, and after she sat in Queen Victoria's chair, which is a real thing that they don't let anyone sit on that. That's for real. A lot of these things are real. But so they're at the Scottish games, the traditional games.
Throwing the poles and stuff.
Yes. Yeah. And Margaret Thatcher is just being these people are imbeciles. They have no culture. They have no civilization. They have no how are they in charge? And I think a little bit, you're supposed to at least consider that possibility throughout these first 3 episodes. And it's very strange to be in Margaret Thatcher's mind, examining that, because if you can sympathize with her on re-examination of the royal family, then are you going to sympathize with her on the re-examination of everything else that she re-examines, which not, which is a dangerous.
Like, are you supposed to fist pump when she fires everybody?
Yeah. I mean, and they're also playing the woman thing, which is certainly interesting to me. And I think that in the first few seasons, it was interesting the way that they handled the queen being a young woman in what is definitively a man's world. And I always thought that was a bit interesting. And now they're kind of pitting the two against each other, as we so often do. And I do think you're supposed to, I don't know. I think it's meant to highlight the complications of all of this and maybe make you re-examine your relationship to the whole show. Because again, as we mentioned, the monarchy is an absolutely an absurd institution.
What did you think of the relationship between Elizabeth and Thatcher? In terms of prime minister power rankings, in terms of just the sheer entertainment of watching her interact with this person?
I mean, in terms of sheer entertainment, delightful. And they are definitely playing off of each other. And I think Olivia Colman is having like the time of her life. In terms of prime minister power rankings, I don't know. I think it's going to get a lot spicier before all is said and done. We're only in 1981?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
it gets a lot worse.
Not good.
Let me tell you something. 84 was bad, guys. I'm anxious to get to this moment. So I'm going to break ahead and do it. For Fairy Tale. I thought Balmoral Test was remarkable. Fairy Tale was like real, like levitational shit. Like I certainly didn't like anticipate it, but like when you watch in the beginning of Fairy Tale, the Edge of 17 moment, you kind of are having like an out of body experience where you're like, yo, they did this. They really did this.
Yes. Yeah. It's, no, I think it's extraordinary. And the way they've handled Diana throughout is pretty remarkable. It's been interesting in kind of the Harry and Meghan era. And people having a renewed interest in the royal family and trying to kind of explain to people how weird the royal family is and like kind of how it works and the disconnect between the real world and their weird Baroque routine. And, I think Meghan Markle has been compared to Diana a lot, and there are a lot of similarities in terms of someone coming into the family who has not been raised in the way that they do things and is like, what the hell is going on? But I thought that Fairy Tale did such like an amazing memory of like creating that feeling, and you can really understand it. And you're like, oh, right, she's just 19 and she wants to listen to her Walkman and has a completely different experience of the world than this creaky old institution. And of course, there's going to be friction. But like just having you live it in like through her experience, I thought was very smart storytelling. And it was also kind of like the best encapsulation of why all of these things go so incredibly wrong, as they always seem to do. Yeah, I mean, just the name Fairy Tale, you think when you see it on the sort of Netflix user interface, you think, oh, right, because she's a princess and she gets to have her dreams come true because she's going to marry a prince. It's really more the fairy tale of the princess stranded alone in the castle. And it's them, whether consciously or unconsciously, whether Charles is essentially displacing his own frustrations and putting them onto this human being who really didn't ask for that. He is saying, I'm miserable, so I'm going to make you miserable too. And I'm going to abandon you in the rain. And I'm going to send you back. And for the first few days, it's going to be exciting and you can roller skate around, but you're going to slowly lose it as we just isolate you and isolate you and isolate you. And then your one contact with the real world is going to be with my on again, off again ex. Yeah, which is also a real thing. And I like even the note that Camilla writes in the series, like what you can see is the same text as the note that was given to Diana, which is just like a absolute mind fuck. I think this episode is so well done, and it makes the choice, to be like, this is a person who's cut off and this is what's going on. And I think it's pretty exhilarating as someone who has read so many different accounts of these things and been so fascinated to watch the show be like, here's what's happening.
Yeah.
And here's our interpretation of it. And here's who's to blame to an extent. I do think that there's a lot more going on in real life.
So tell me a little bit about it, because I thought it was a real interesting choice that they never break from Diana's perspective there. Like,
right.
Charles goes off and we were just like, okay, but like, you could have easily leveled out the audience sentiment meter by having Charles's B plot of like him being like, I'm still sort of like not sure about what I'm doing and blah, blah, blah. And instead it just seems actually sadistic on his part.
Yeah. And I think I wasn't there, obviously, and I've just read a bunch of things. I think it's the honest choice. Ultimately, it's boiling a lot of things down to the essential thing, which is that she was a 19-year-old. She was 19 years old. She's as young as you're seeing, and got thrown in the deep end with absolutely no support. And Charles was of no help to her, whether it's because he was still in love with Camilla, or whether it's because he had all of these expectations from his family, or because he screwed up, or some version of all of the above. The royal family itself was like no help to her. And they show that by the queen just like never being available, as she's usually not available to Charles either. They show Diana's grandmother giving her the training.
Yeah.
By all accounts, a historically accurate portrayal of that woman. But that gives you a sense of what she's seeing in her own family. And, her family life was a bit more complicated than you can see just because you don't really see them. But I think like a lack of support and feeling like she's alone and looking for love somewhere else is true to what you see on the show and true to what happened in real life. You don't see I guess you see the media in terms of all of the letters coming in and that she starts sort of replacing real life company with all of those letters and with that attention. And I'm curious to see what they do in the next episodes, because the impression that you get is that without any love or, connection to anyone around her, she starts the power of celebrity is very real. And so that kind of starts filling in, but it really boils it down to the essentials in a way that I guess you have to on a TV show, but I was pretty impressed by.
They then sort of pivot once Charles returns to building up towards the wedding. And you get the moment of Charles sort of having this breakdown while the fireworks are going off and talking to his mother. I thought that was a remarkable scene. And it was tough because you are essentially at that point when Charles returns, it's really incredible writing, because now you've sort of, if not turned on Charles, you see him through somebody else's eyes. For the beginning of the show, you're kind of seeing the family through Charles's eyes. Up until that moment, it's what this group of people is doing to him and what they won't let him do. And that's the moment where I'm like, oh yeah, like it's slightly moving. And now we're seeing this guy maybe as a different kind of character. Yeah.
Absolutely. I was also really struck with the scene right before that. And this is some real Crown nerd stuff, so I apologize. But it's when they're in St. Paul's is where they got married. They didn't get married in Westminster Abbey, I think because of the size of the church. But they're there for the rehearsal. And it's the first time they meet since he's been away on tour. And they kind of go into that private chapel to have a fight. And I don't know if you remember the scene from the first season of The Crown, right before the Queen's coronation, in what I think is the best episode of that season, when Claire Foy and Matt Smith as Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip have a fight about their marriage and the power in their marriage and their commitment to the future of their marriage, like in a side chapel. And it's like a very clear echo. And, that's cool filmmaking, but it is also just the generational echo of these people are put in these positions and asked to sacrifice their personal happiness or their relationships and increasingly for what?
Sure. Right. I mean, that is the thing is like when I was watching the scene between Anne and Charles, you're kind of asking, I think Anne has arrived at this point, but it's just like, what do you want?
Yeah.
You know, you are never going to be someone of real consequence in terms of governing, in terms of deciding the fate of this country. You are now an ornament. So within that reality, what do you want? And he, like lots of people his age, is just like, I don't know, but not this. Yeah. And Anne is just like, trust me, it's easier not to fight it, basically.
Yeah. Why can't you accept it? Why can't you just kind of, she's the practical one to her core. I was very team Anne. I've never really cared about her in real life. She seems like cool. She likes horses.
Yeah. Cool. Horse girl.
I think she's very good at horses, whatever that means. But I thought that her season 3 character was great. And I felt a little betrayed when she just rolls in and is like, get it over with.
Yeah. Right.
Like, what are you guys doing? Like, what are we? And like, really, like no one wants to stop and think about this. And it is interesting the way...
Only Margaret is the... Princess Margaret is the one who's like, we can stop this.
Yeah. And even when Charles is saying that, he's portrayed as such a whiner and a guy who is like being unfaithful or betraying, Diana, which... True. I mean, again, this is like a 19-year-old who didn't really know what was going on, who just got put in a tremendously unfair situation. But that he's being unfair and a bad person instead of asking some like pretty reasonable questions. In real life, Chris, they had met, like interacted in person together a total of 13 times before they got married. Jesus. 13. That's like, what are we doing? Also, like...
And he's obviously got a multi-year relationship on and off again with Camilla.
Right. And
so the deal is like he and Camilla, like she was the love of his life and he was just never allowed to have her.
Yes. That is at least what they're selling now that they have been like happily married for some time. And I think that is like, that's a very nice story. And they have been married for a very long time. He never gave her up. Like whether or not it always had to be that way is under, some discussion depending on who you talk to. But the other thing that the show kind of like shies away from, frankly, is that Diana had to be a virgin. So not Diana, but whoever Charles married had to be a virgin. So the other reason that Camilla was like a non-starter was she like had a quote passed.
Right. She was an adult.
Like, and no one's being like, should we reconsider this? It's 1981. Right. Like maybe it's okay. It's very strange stuff.
So the first 3 episodes, obviously immensely satisfying for you.
Yes.
And then we're entering into really the rocket ship for Diana, where she just becomes a global icon. I've watched a few past 3. So when I got screeners, and I'm really excited to see what you think of the next couple. We'll do these conversations every episode for the next 3 episodes. So I'm so thankful to Amanda for joining me. Any final notes on these first 3 episodes?
I just think it's so rare that a show actually lives up to expectations like
and
this.
Your expectations were not small for this. Yeah.
No, they were sky high. And I think that that's a testament both to this show it's had 4 seasons and there is something about maybe not training a viewership, but like getting room to build up to this point because like Margaret Thatcher and Diana is like, you couldn't make a better case study for how to explore what's going on in Britain and to explore the Queen herself and the nature of power and being and
her relevance.
And a famous female. Yeah, exactly. But this show kind of did the work leading up to this, but then it's just the level of execution. A+. Yeah. Very pleased.
Yeah. The writing remains just to me like every single scene, every single line just seems like expert craftsmanship. And it's so rewarding. I can't wait to talk to you about the next batch of episodes. We'll do that on Thursday. Amanda, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I am now joined by Amanda Dobbins, our resident Crown expert. Amanda, thanks for joining me again.
My pleasure.
And was it your pleasure to watch these middle 3 episodes of The Crown season 4?
Absolutely. They're crushing it. Are you kidding me? This stuff it's really good.
So we're talking today about favorites, Fagin, and Terra Nullis. And so this is basically it's the episode with all the kids, the episode with the guy who breaks into the palace, and the episode where Charles and Diana go to Australia. And I have to say that I think 4, I've seen a few people ding 4 here and there. for some reason, maybe because it's too well they put too much of a bow on it. I think it's fucking extraordinary. Like if I thought that Favorites was a really like startling achievement in dramatic writing, and just in terms of the amount of stuff that they burn through and the way that they bring in all these characters. What did you think of that episode?
I agree with you, and I have not seen any criticisms because I don't really consume social media anymore. But to anyone who thinks it's too neat or they put a bow on it, I mean, I guess find another show. Yeah. This is like, Peter Morgan is a playwright. There is a lot of construction and intentional thematic and expositional dialogue and set pieces built into this. It's not that it's obvious, but all of it is like very crafted. So I agree with you that I thought episode 4 was tremendous in terms of the amount of like information and setup that they managed to convey to you in a very like efficient and effective way, because we don't really know anything about 2 of the 4 children. You barely met any of them. Anne has been kind of a side character. And so there are 4 children who get their own scenes and moments. And so you have to develop those characters. You have to develop the Queen's relationship to all of them. You also have the Margaret Thatcher thematic connection of the children. And you're drawing out a little bit about Margaret Thatcher's relationship to women as well, which is an important, larger thematic episode. And also you've got the Falklands War. I mean, it's, and they do it deftly. And I thought about something you say a lot, which is that the Crown doesn't waste a moment. They just pick the scenes, they pick the lines, and you know everything you need to know. That is so hard, and they nail it. Yeah,
I mean, they do a lot of stuff that I think other shows would probably shy away from because it would feel too like they were showing you too many of their cards. So I kept thinking about the scene between Elizabeth and Anne. They go riding out. This is the thing that they sort of both share, is this love of horses, even though Anne is obviously Philip's favorite, and that's like in the way that gets conveyed in the beginning. And their conversation's heartbreaking, like their conversation is legitimately heartbreaking. And I think you could look at what Anne says, where she's like, I used to enjoy being the difficult one and scaring people. And now I don't feel like I have any control over that anymore. And you could be like, well, like you might go your entire life and never have that level of self-awareness. You might have to go through 30 years of therapy to find that out about yourself. And this young woman just like sort of pops that off when confronted by her mother on a random day. But it's beautiful writing. It's just like amazing writing. And I thought the performances, specifically in that scene, mostly because the 3 sons come off as absolute troll lords in this episode. I mean, yeah, but the Anne scene in particular was quite lovely, I thought.
Listen, I think that there are levels of emotional breakthrough and clarity in this show that never happened in real life, and certainly have never happened in the UK to anyone who has been a citizen of that country.
Andy and I just spent a lot of time talking about salads in England as they relate, because they get a lot of salads in industry, and how most of their salads are just blue cheese and bacon. Their emotional relationships are blue cheese and bacon too. They are not talking. They're not doing the smart greens.
No, I mean, it's a TV show, and we are projecting emotions and trying to figure out how these people felt about the facts that we know are true. That's what I think is so interesting about episode 4, which made me reflect a little bit on the Queen character in this season. And an interesting thing is happening. We talked a little bit about this on the last episode, where the Olivia Colman is kind of popping out a little bit. And Olivia Colman is one of the great actresses of our time. And also I find her personally hilarious. So I think that that's great. But I see moments where nothing is on the page and it's just Olivia Colman, like giving it that sense of humor, giving it that timing, or maybe even the character is being a little bit written to her strengths. And that is also a little bit because the Queen is not, I mean, she's not a side character, but the way they're telling the story is about all of the other people and events who are kind of crowding into that character's life and how she's balancing all of it. But episode 4 is just, it's about the Queen. Yeah. And all of the writing, it's character development that is in line with the past 3 seasons that we've seen. And it's pretty extraordinary. And I think Olivia Colman also does like a great job with the actual written script and the character and the reacting to like the horror show of her children. I mean, they all are. Do you have a favorite of the four? Who's your favorite?
On the show or in real life?
No, on the show. I don't really think that you need to like pick.
It's
royal
definitely
favorites.
shifted. I think last season it would have been Charles, and this season it's probably Anne. Although, let me get to the end of it. I mean, it's obviously not Edward or Andrew. So,
yeah.
I wanted to just quickly before we get into Edward and Andrew and Charles a little bit, ask you. You start this episode up. Did you expect the wedding?
No, if only because number one, I read some spoilers about how they don't show the wedding, but I do also think in the
wedding between Charles and Diana, obviously.
Yes, the most watched royal wedding I think of all time. I should have gotten the statistics. It was close to like 1 billion people who watched it. I mean, that was everywhere.
And people taped it and watched it like over and over again.
Right.
Yeah.
Including me, who DVR'd it when BBC America re-aired it before the wedding of Harry and Meghan. And it was part of their like 12-hour block of programming. I watched all of it. I mean, it's pretty boring. You know, they didn't really have the production values in 1981 that we expect from a royal wedding now. Anyway, but no, there was a sort of finality to episode 3.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something intentional about the way they showed the rehearsal.
Yeah.
And kind of the real behind the scenes emotions where I was like, oh, okay, this is an interesting choice. And like, this is what we're going to get. And also I've seen it before. So it was fine.
Like,
with
what
me.
would they do? Because like there wouldn't be a lot of opportunity for people to be talking during that. So unless there would be some Fagin-like wrinkle of history that they wanted to explore, I'm not really sure what they would kind of do there.
Right. And I mean, it happened at such a scale that even it would defy the Crown's CGI budget. I will say, I was surprised that Diana disappeared for 2 episodes.
Yes.
I mean, we'll get to episode 5, but she is very briefly shown, and she is heavily pregnant when she's shown in episode 4, and she just won't come out of the room. And in one way, that's really all you need to know about how their marriage is going and how everything is, how everything is shaken out. But on the other hand, I was like, this is a choice. Diana, pretty popular.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I thought that that was interesting. And also the suggestion that Charles is starting to become under the influence of these like gurus and like self-help and nutritionists, which I didn't know that about him.
Oh yeah. The Lawrence Vanderpost reference. I only know about this from the Tina Brown book, but apparently he brought those books on their honeymoon and then tried to get Diana, who was 20 at the time of their wedding, to read the books and discuss them over dinner on their honeymoon. So that's how that went. And like, you can see the results of it in this episode of The Crown when they aren't just speaking to each other. But you also see it a little bit in the garden scene when he's just kind of doing all of the jargon.
He's talking about Xanadu, yeah.
Yeah, and like reciting poems and being like, it's important that I have like a expression of self in these gardens, which is extremely
also
pretentious.
like my fuck pad next to Camilla, like because it's like 15 minutes away. Like when Elizabeth is like, yeah, also that's cool, but you also chose this house because it's 15 minutes from Camilla. Elizabeth is quite a gossip. I like how much of the show this season is essentially her going to Anne and being like, I heard you're sleeping with your security detail, or her going to Charles and being like, I hear Diana never comes out of her room.
And they have the recurring line, right? It's like, I heard talk or I heard chatter. And the person always says, I thought we didn't listen to chatter.
Yeah, right.
And that like keeps going again. And then of course they all do. I mean, it's really gossipy. One thing that is illustrated a little bit in like the Buckingham Palace of it all, which we see, but is also true at Kensington Palace, which is where Margaret lives and Charles and Diana live. And, you see it at Charles's personal Xanadu fuck pad country home. It's like the number of people that are around and are witnessing all of this.
Yeah.
And the royal family just doesn't care. And they just do whatever they want in front of dozens of people who then just gossip. There are no secrets. They are not covert agents at all.
Right. And then there's also this sort of high council of gossip that's like Anne, Margaret, the Queen Mother, and Elizabeth, who just gather to chit chat every couple of weeks. Let's talk a little bit about Fagin, which was, I think, the closest this episode gets to, I mean, not a bottle episode, but a kind of huge detour where it's not about any of our sort of central characters per se, and is essentially about Thatcher without being about Thatcher. It's a Thatcher episode because, and is almost a tonic against, I think, the criticisms some people have levied against the show, which is making Margaret Thatcher into sort of a sympathetic figure. And you've just gone through this experience of seeing her clearly like very concerned for the well-being of her son, who is on,
but also being like, "Fuck you" to my daughter.
Yeah, right. Essentially being like you're my, like, not my favorite, so who cares? I have to say that like sometimes you just come across something that rich people are fascinated with, like car rallies, and you're just like, why though? Like, why do you care about driving to Dakar? Like, I don't understand it.
I feel like this is a Euro thing, so you would have more access to it. I know that you at least follow this stuff. Juliet is always trying to get me to watch the car racing show. Yeah, but I haven't because I'm an American and I don't take a lot of pride in that, except for the fact that I don't care about like auto racing.
Well, I just know that Patrick Dempsey quit Grey's so that he could do this.
And you know that Fassbender is now like a race car driver?
Yeah, it's like it's like robbing us of our greatest actors.
Race car driver. Yeah,
Patrick Dempsey and Michael Fassbender. Anyway, I just thought that the Fagin episode was the tonic. It was this is what this woman's policies are really doing. And much like we were saying with Anne seeming to have like this complete understanding of her own impulses and behaviors, Fagin is completely aware of like how the institutional state apparatus is making him into a marginalized person.
Right. I mean, the basically soliloquy that he gives the Queen once he breaks in for the second time and they have their meeting, which is all a true story. And I think that it did take 10 to 15 minutes before anyone came to rescue the Queen. But he gives a perfectly written diagnosis of the English or the British experience and Thatcherism in the 1980s. That also, if you want to read it, like certainly like has echoes of the present. I do find that every once in a while, one of the characters gives a speech about how Britain is falling apart, and you look around and you can feel a little bit of intentionality. But yeah, I can't imagine that was how the conversation went in real life, just because you could spend days or weeks writing something that acute, but it's very effective. It's very effective.
And, you know, I personally really enjoyed like the Crown letting its hair down a little bit and playing some Elvis Costello and some specials and, you know, going around. And
can I tell you, like, my husband, Zach, was walking in and out, and he walked in. I was rewatching part of this episode, and he heard one of the music cues and was like, "Great music in The Crown this season." And I was just like, I know. I was like, oh, both times you've come in for the anti-Thatcher episode in the 80s, and like you're getting those cues. Yeah.
And if people are interested in this time period and what it like, some of the stuff that Fagin is talking about, there's a novel by a guy named David Peace, who some people might know from the Yorkshire Ripper series of novels, like 1974, 1977. It was made into a movie with Andrew Garfield. He also wrote a book called GB84, which is about the coal miner strike and Thatcher's sort of handling of that. And it's a really dense but fascinating read if you're interested in reading more on the topic. I don't have like a ton to say about the Fagin episode, other than that to me was when they pull Fagin out of the room. And after she sends her servant back out to get the tea, and she does her little basically like collapse. I'm like, that's why you get Olivia Colman.
It's true. Yeah, you pay the big bucks. It is a bottle episode. I mean, even though it's not, it like in the sense that it has many locations, and you kind of watch him break into Buckingham Palace multiple times. But in the sense that it's self-contained. But I was like so impressed by it, just in terms of the Crown just decides to do 50 minutes to completely dismantle everything that it has already been saying about Margaret Thatcher. And it's playwriting, but plays are great. And they both act it very well.
Yeah. Let's talk a little about Taryn Ellis. Like last time when you were on, we were speaking about how these episodes, now that this show has gone on for 4 seasons, it's got such a nice backlog of episodes that it can now echo. And so clearly I went back to Pride and Joy, which is when Elizabeth and Philip go to Australia, and is also a big Margaret episode of her acting out and just kind of being like, I deserve to be an individual. And when Elizabeth comes back, she basically has to like rap Margaret on the knuckles for making a scene. Both of those sort of storylines were encapsulated in Charles and Diana's trip to Australia and New Zealand. It starts out so bad, it gets somewhat better, and then the sort of mega stardom of Diana sort of explodes. Is that sort of ground zero for where Diana becomes like a global phenomenon? Is that tour, or had it been starting before then?
It had definitely been starting before. And this is another thing of you're making a TV show, you have to condense some things. I think it like really definitely does condense those things, but she was a superstar out of the gate. And I think kind of the upstaging problem, as they call it, was absolutely in full effect in Australia. But I do think that the political historical role that the tour is said to present in this show, which is that Australia is part of the British Commonwealth, which is a leftover of the empire. And like, frankly, I'm not a constitutional or political expert,
right.
So I don't really need to present on that. But the queen is a queen in name. And I think even at the beginning of the tour, there were rumblings of we don't even need a queen in name. And then the tour was such a wild success. And Diana specifically was such a wild success that to this day, I believe she is still the monarchy, the queen, or recognized in Australia. And all of it starts with a TV interview from the new Prime Minister of Australia. And those are real quotes.
Yeah.
So that is true. And that is a great summary of the geopolitical power that Diana had. And everything about the resentment and the upstaging is definitely true, even if it had started a bit earlier.
Yeah. And I even thought just the idea that Charles had these theatrical ambitions was great, because you get into the psychology of wanting to be on stage and wanting to be in the spotlight and wanting to be seen and featured and appreciated. And that's such like a huge theme among all the children, as we see in Favorites too, is, well, except for the like Edward and Andrew, who don't seem to care about that because they're just bullying people. But
Edward in particular gets a tough edit. I didn't know that he was that.
Him just being like, I want to be a cop.
Yeah. And the braces and him just, I mean,
he'd be like, I got a kid kicked out of school for smoking because he wasn't smart enough not to get caught. But you get the sense that if you think about these tours as a play, as a theatrical experience, that Charles is like, and I'm going to be the star. This is going to be my moment to do a bunch of stuff. And whether it's because she can't make it up a hill or because everybody falls in love with her, I am constantly sort of like off to the side stage here while the spotlight's on Diana. I guess, I think that the thing that this episode did was also show the scope of the show, which is, like you said, it is very CGI'd in places, but you really do get the feeling that like, this is a show that like travels and looks out into the wider world. I'm not sure if they shot this actually in Australia, but it looks great.
The sheep station in particular is so beautiful when they have that kind of magic hour confrontation when they both decide to admit that they love each other, which I found to be an incredibly heartbreaking scene. I think only because I don't read the Charles admission as entirely genuine, or maybe it is genuine, but at this point that the character is not someone who understands how to process emotions and doesn't know what to do with the person in front of him and is just trying to make a situation work. And they both are. Again, it's really great writing. No one would ever have a conversation that like focused, and also it would not be resolved that quickly.
No.
They really go from like Camilla to, oh, I love you too, and let's have more sex in like 90 seconds.
Yes.
But God, I mean, it is really beautiful, and the writing is beautiful, and as you said, the scenery, like those cliffs or whatever behind them.
And it's a lot like the scene in Pride and Joy where they're like, she's throwing bottles at Philip at some house in Australia or whatever. Right. And then, I just wanted to ask you, the last bit was the last scene between Elizabeth and Diana and the hug.
Yeah.
And, this is another example of like two people like perfectly articulating like these ideas, but it also was just an amazing collision of post-war England, or like mid-century English sort of sensibilities with this very modern idea that you need connection and touch and feeling, and almost like this new agey kind of idea. And Diana just kind of being like, I need to feel that you love me, not just sort of be part of the team.
Yeah. And also really just a desperation on Diana's part. And I think, they have been showing her bulimia throughout the episodes, and they sort of show her family issues, though not as much, but they show her kind of loneliness. And it's clearly a person who's at her wit's end, but at her wit's end in a very different way than anyone else in the family. Mm-hmm. And I find just kind of like the contrast in energies between Emma Corrin and everybody else to be really fascinating. And it can almost be a little jarring at times. Juliet Littman and I were talking on Jam Session a bit, where Juliet was like, something seems off to me with Diana. And I was like, no, that's the point. She didn't fit in at all. And she's really young and she's struggling. And she just, as you said, has a completely different like emotional intelligence and system, and did not fit with these people at all. And it's a disaster to the point that, that final climactic hug, part of me wants to laugh when they do like the wide shot and you can just see Olivia Colman's arms
trying to wiggle
just kind
out
of like flailing. Yeah. And that's like, in a way it's funny, but it's not. It's horrifying. Right. It's really sad. And it is definitely one of the major problems that continues to haunt the royal family, but, is also just, I think Diana really did suffer as a result. They are not emotionally warm people, as every episode seems to reinforce in one way or another.
So you mentioned how she hadn't really appeared in the previous two episodes other than sort of kind of talked about in favorites. And then I don't think she's in Fagin at all. Mm-hmm. I think that that's what they're trying to do to show us the isolation of the character. Like by not having her around and checking in on her, I think that they are asking us to intellectually understand no one has seen her, or she is just like in a room somewhere, or she is being kind of shunted off to the side.
I think that's smart. I was reflecting a lot on the fact that it's not the Diana show. It is The Crown, and it is a show about the Elizabeth character. And I think if you were doing the pure Diana show, you would do it very differently. And if Peter Morgan is listening, please feel free to make that show, and I will watch every episode of it, in whatever form you choose to do it. But it's a question of emphasis as well. And I think you're right that choice of perspective also does illuminate something about her existence, and that she is just really kind of cut off from these people. And they, see little references to her, like Anne. Can I just pick one bone?
Yeah, sure.
So everyone knows that, I'm not biased. I love The Crown, but every once in a while something rubs me the wrong way. I think Anne is probably my favorite because she's not the only person who's a total garbage. She's the only child who's not a total garbage human. But the way that she seems, they keep having Anne be like, I resent Diana's popularity and Diana's clothes.
And Charles will too, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's perceptive, and it is also a little bit of just kind of like someone has to make the wheels turn, so she points out that major looming battle between Charles and Diana. But I don't really think Anne cared that much. It seems a little unfair to Anne, a character I enjoyed, who seemed to be kind of above it, and that she keeps harping on it. I understand expositionally you have to do it because you can't have the whole circus in the show. It's more focused, but justice for Anne.
Yeah, I haven't watched ahead. I also would love for Princess Margaret to get a couple more lines other than, would you like some sherry, and she'll break. Because she obviously has the most perception of all of the people in that room of what's happening to these younger people.
Yeah.
And
but that's what's so fascinating, and is also a little sad, is like how she and the Queen Mother are just like the unit, like the, unmarried older women who just kind of show up for support team whenever, in a way that's sweet and it's nice. And, Helena Bonham Carter offers the queen a drink, but it happened very quickly. And for someone who we've invested in so much time in, for her to just be now one of like the old ladies in the corner, it's like, oh, it's sad.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
It's my pleasure. You think things are going to go well in the last 4 episodes?
I'm anticipating a super happy ending. Yeah.
Okay.
I do wish, honestly, if they wanted to do like 15 or 20 of these, I would be fine. Like,
yeah, that's where I am too.
I'm glad they're doing 2 more seasons. All right. So we'll finish up the season on Monday. It'll be episodes 7, 8, 9, and 10. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for joining me, Amanda.
Thank you.
So I'm joined by Amanda Dobbins, as usual,
Hello, Chris.
to discuss these last 4 episodes of The Crown Season 4. Amanda, thank you so much for doing this whole project with me, first of all.
Thank you for having me. It's a real treat for me. This is a show that I love, and it's fun to talk about it with you.
And we've talked about 20 episodes once we're done this pod, and then we have 20 more to go, right?
Yes.
This marks the end of the Olivia Colman administration.
Yeah.
And I thought we could start with a little bit more of a big picture conversation, because there's so many elements of The Crown that I think have now started to echo back to the beginning of this series. And, you can start to really look at this more as like a show unto itself rather than some sort of like quasi-historical document. And I was wondering if you have noticed your relationship to the show changing over the years and seasons in any kind of describable way.
Absolutely. I continue to think the show is masterful in terms of its writing and the production value, and the performances from Olivia Colman on down are just extraordinary. We were talking before we started recording about how I spent some time this morning on Josh O'Connor fan pages, which is says a lot about a lot of things, but it is a testament to his acting, and specifically that even playing such a ultimately despicable role as Prince Charles is in season 4, that he is so magnetic that I wanted to know more about him. But my relationship to the show's relationship to the royal family has changed. And maybe the show's relationship hasn't changed and I've just become wise to it. But I do think this season in particular has been not when they've turned on the royal family. And I don't think any show that is this invested in this institution can be anti-monarchist. I think we have to acknowledge that if you're watching this show, you are consuming, if not royalist propaganda, then royalist like empathy.
It's hard to listen to Philip's last monologue and think anything else.
Yes. Yeah, and it's just, it's like, it's time spent. And I do ultimately believe that just putting her in the center and asking you to empathize specifically with Queen Elizabeth is ultimately to ask you to at least digest and see the world from their point of view. But I think especially in the last half of season 4, the knives start turning a bit on the royal family and what it is and what it represents and what it has done and the human cost both within and certainly outside the royal family. And it's an interesting line for the show to walk. I admire them for trying it. I mean, I think you have to at some point, or else this just becomes cotton candy. Yeah. And the royal family is an anachronistic, patently ridiculous institution. It is in many ways like a fairy tale that people are forced to live through, and they do reckon with that idea. But it has also been a source of cruelty and pain to millions of people in a lot of different ways if you really tease it out and if you go back to some of the empirical history. So it's been interesting. I was surprised. I think they've done it really effectively. I feel not queasier about my affection for the show, but queasier about my interest in the royal family. And I think that's the point. Yeah.
I mean, I think that when this series first came on, there was a little bit like the most dismissive thing you could say, like the elevator pitch would be like, what if Queen Elizabeth but hot, Yeah. And it was just sort of like imagining these people that most people's relationship with is that they're senior citizens, and imagining their like wild, hot young years and then placing them in this sort of canvas of World War II and having these figures like Winston Churchill and John F. Kennedy show up and like kind of minting Claire Foy and Vanessa Kirby as stars. And we should note that The Crown has made like 4 or 5 careers so far.
At least.
Yeah.
It's starting.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens for like Josh O'Connor and Emma Corrin, et cetera.
But, as it gets further and further, I was trying to grapple with whether I was like, is this wish fulfillment? Like, is this basically, I'm so curious about these people just because I know them as celebrities in my lifetime. And that I am now having, almost in a like a sort, when you watch Steve Jobs and you're just like, this conversation did not happen this way, but Jesus, if it did, like, it's so fascinating. And it's almost like this is what they would have said had they had a screenwriter preparing their remarks for them. And right. I love that. Like, that's fine with me. But watching some of especially the last 2 episodes, Avalanche and War, I was just like, this is probably not how it went. This is probably not what Elizabeth said to Charles when he finally gets it up to ask her for a divorce. But maybe it is essentially what was said,
Well, I think that's possibly the most dangerous wish fulfillment of all. And I did find myself wondering this a bit, particularly in smaller moments. For example, in the kind of last Margaret Thatcher episode, when she's forced out of office. And there's a moment where Olivia Colman as the Queen is recapping her audience with Margaret Thatcher to Philip. And Olivia Colman starts doing Margaret Thatcher as the Queen.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's hilarious. And I love Olivia Colman. And to be fair to the real Queen, it's always kind of been written that she does have more of a sense of humor than possibly she lets on. But is the Queen as witty and funny and doing Margaret Thatcher impressions? I'm not sure. Right. I don't know if these people, and it's not just that are these people able to speak in these Shakespearean monologues, which we know they're not, but are these people doing this kind of deep analysis? Has the Queen ever really stood up and called Prince Charles on his tremendous bullshit? Mm-hmm. I don't know. We would like to think so. Because that's part of the exercise of the Crown and the exercise of humanizing this person is ultimately hoping that this person is as interesting and worthy of all this scrutiny as, we've spent 40 hours of television at this point and 60 something, maybe 70 years in her reign.
Yeah.
But is she, and can any one person really live up to that scrutiny? I'm not sure.
The theme of this season seems to be, I just want to be loved. It seems to be several of these characters over the course of the last 2 seasons, really, because I think Philip had this kind of moment last season, and I think Margot's had this moment several times. She has sort of a relapse of it in the Hereditary Principle. But it's basically these characters arriving at these points where they're just like, I am not getting what I need as a human being from this family, from this life, from this role. And then eventually coming back down to earth and realizing nobody is, nobody is getting what they want out of life. But it's so thematically kind of consistent over the course of the year about you can kind of feel the roots of Charles's need for attention back in his theater days. And Diana obviously is I can express myself through performance. Oh my God. I think yeah, I know. I mean, and we'll get to the specific episodes, but do you agree that feels like the theme, at least interpersonally, of that? Because I think that there's always going to be in The Crown, there's going to be the sort of emotional theme, and then there's going to be the broader socio-historical theme of the season.
Sure, and I think the way that those two things intermingle within the royal family, there's a difference between wanting to be loved and wanting to be appreciated, right? And wanting to be loved is about this family who don't really know how to speak to each other. And wanting to be appreciated is this family that has just a tremendous amount of expectations put on them because of dynastic roles that are thrust upon them and media attention, and they're pitted against each other to some extent. And so it's the initial tension, even in season 1 of The Crown, which is the private versus the public and the personal versus the role, and being torn between these two things, and how no human really, besides the Queen, can successfully manage to bridge that gap. And it just tears all of them apart in different ways.
And it limits the amount that they're willing to allow other people to be happy, which I think is sort of a crucial thing. Like one of my favorite sort of running gags, and we brought it up last pod, but is Anne sort of her inability to like ever like truly allow Charles to be happy in one way or the other. Like she won't indulge him in his unhappiness either. He's like, and yet is also like right there always to just sort of be like, Diana is a mess and she's not right for this family.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I think it's in Avalanche when they put Anne into just like the narrator and the omniscient like psychologist, basically. And in the span of 2 minutes, she has more emotional awareness on behalf of every single character on the show than, once again, any British person has had about anything in their entire life. I mean, that's the most unrealistic part of The Crown, is all of these people being able to put their finger on and directly express emotions, motivations, wants, and needs, which just British people don't do.
Yeah.
But yes, Anne is sort of, she's not even the Cassandra. She's just the realist, and she has to show up in everybody's face and be like, this sucks, too bad, like once an episode.
Yeah. So we could start with the episodes that we're going to discuss. The Margaret episode is just super depressing. But I just admire this show for knowing exactly how to execute a season where they're going to have so many major historical moments, then a couple of interesting footnote historical moments that you may not have known about. And then there is going to be a broader kind of family dynamic. And then usually over the last 2 seasons, they've had like a Margaret episode where they really do focus on her turmoil. Did you know about the other cousins who were in the hospital?
I knew sort of the sanitized version that the royal family was peddling, that Nerissa and Catherine Bowes-Lyon were sent to an institution at some point. But what that means in reality and to see it is completely different. And I was pretty, I was shocked and really upset by it. And I kind of feel like this episode is a little bit for people like me who have read the official description for a long time, and then you see what's going on. And it also, most of the time when I watch The Crown, as soon as a historical event or a character shows up, I'm like, oh, this is the Mountbatten episode, or oh, this is the something episode. And I didn't know what was going on.
Me neither.
And that reveal was, I have some questions about the psychologist and her practices and whether that was legal. But besides, it doesn't really matter because it's so horrifying.
Yeah, doesn't she say like her first meeting with her, like she's like, I have some professional colleagues who just let me know that your cousins are in a sanitarium.
And I guess like maybe they didn't have HIPAA in the 60s or 70s or whatever, but it's sort of beside the point. I found it quite effective and upsetting. And then you add on the Margaret of it all, which is really depressing and about someone just coming to acceptance with their sense of purposelessness and the cruelty of their family. It's really tough. I watched this one and I didn't watch any more Crown episodes for the night because I was just like, wow, these people are gross. These people are just are heartless and inhuman, and this institution is as inhuman. We say that a lot, but like it's cruel.
Yeah, and then there was, also just her getting edged out by Andrew. It's just like that he can have his 21st birthday. I thought I just could have used a lot more Dazzle. I wish we had gotten a little bit more like Dazzle, a little bit more 80s Bowie going. And I loved the conversation between Elizabeth and Margaret where she's like, and he's a friend of Dorothy.
Yes. Again, it's not my impression that the real queen would be hip to that lingo at that point, though, or, know what's going on. They haven't always portrayed her as a person who is like aware of the outer society workings. People are always explaining the gossip to her, and then suddenly she's like really in the know. But I did really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Would someone who knows the phrase "a friend to Dorothy" not know who Billy Joel was?
Billy Joel.
Yeah.
Maybe she's just behind the times.
Yeah.
So she's like 10 to 20 years behind everything else. And Billy Joel is like fairly up to date.
The next episode was 48-1, which I've seen a lot of people say is their favorite of the season. I think it's definitely like the strongest political intrigue episode. And if you, in the same way where you were like, I needed to stop watching Crown episodes for the night after Hereditary Principal, I think that it puts to rest any sort of Margaret's kind of hot, like like any sympathy people had for Margaret Thatcher, I think gets snuffed out there.
So people like it because it is so definitively just portraying what, like, the common internet understanding of Margaret Thatcher.
You know what I think it is because it actually puts Elizabeth into action, which she just doesn't get to do a lot of. She's That's largely true. Like receiving guests or having lunch, for a lot of the last 2 seasons. And she actually gets to play a part in the game in this one.
Right. And so much of it is about her doing nothing and saying nothing. And in this episode, she gets to do something politically. And in a later episode, she finally puts her foot down for certain members of her family, which I also, it's true that the last third of the season is her personality peeking out a little bit.
Yeah.
I have some notes about the press strategy.
Let's do it.
In this.
Let's do it.
Okay. Because the queen decides that she's not going to deny the story. Mm-hmm. And she's like, maybe I want people to know that I don't agree with her. And their press secretary, Michael Shea, who is a real person and did become a successful novelist, is like, I don't know, ma'am. But then they do it. And then it backfires. And then he has to take the fall. So, and it's portrayed as somewhat unfair, I would say.
Yes.
Here's my thing. I think that you have to be able to spin the queen wanting Margaret Thatcher to take some sort of action against apartheid South Africa as a positive. And if you can't spin that one way or another, you shouldn't be the press officer anymore. That's where I am.
Very true. But I do think that we should just also talk about the idea of briefing as it functions in the British media and in British government. You may think that this is anachronistic. It is not. Boris Johnson's major, most of his senior advisors, they just went through a purge there in England because there was an inter-office civil war between Boris Johnson's girlfriend, essentially, and a woman that they had brought on, I think, to be basically the face and voice of the government, the spokesperson for the government, versus these 2 guys, Lee Kane and Dominic Cummings, who were very big in the Brexit campaign and the Vote Leave campaign. And the 2 guys had essentially been briefing against this woman that Boris Johnson and his wife had just hired to become the spokesperson for the government. And it just blew up in everybody's faces. There was maybe one day of number 10 Downing sources say, and then it was just all out in the open and everybody got their knickers in a twist, so to speak. And it's just incredible to watch this happen over and over again there.
Wasn't there also something about a hedgehog in the whole?
Yeah,
breakdown?
one of the guys was a former reporter for one of the tabloids and had door stopped somebody in a hedgehog outfit once. I don't remember. We're so we're oh my God, everybody's going to Substack here, and they're just Daily Mail reporters just dressing up like hedgehogs and just getting after it.
And you make a good point, and it's a point that the show is very interested in, and that continues to reverberate, especially with the royal family now, which is kind of, if you're gonna get involved with the British press, you gotta be prepared to go round after round, or else you will lose. They are a very specific, and speaking of vicious institution with their own norms and their own worlds. And, if you're not the target of it, then you kind of have to admire it because they've just created a whole world for themselves.
Yeah.
But I think there's a reason that the royal family has historically not been involved. And, there's that episode from last season when they do a BBC documentary. It totally backfires. They're like, nope, we don't want to be involved in the press anymore. But it's too late. Yeah. And even now, I think there's they obviously need the press to survive, but because what are they without the press? They are just press creatures. They are national press creatures. And at the same time, they just absolutely ruin the lives of every single person in their path. And we will see that in a very literal sense next season, I believe, in The Crown. But you see it continue with Harry and Meghan. That's a major part of it. And so choosing to get in the ring, albeit for, I think, the correct reasons in this particular episode, you're right. It has ramifications.
It feels like, yeah. I mean, 48 to 1
spin that one.
Feels like the last gasp of the Crown, not the show, but the actual institution having some sort of role in policy in any kind of functional way that we see. I mean, I keep going back to this thing that, is it Michael Fagan says to her when he's in Buckingham Palace, and he's just sort of commenting on how everything is sort of falling apart and they need like a paint job and the wallpaper needs to be redone and everything needs to be touched up because it is crumbling a little bit. I mean, and she is sort of locked away up in these castles with just not much like functional responsibility. And when you think about where the show started and her as this like basically like the backbone of a nation at war, and now she's just like, all I can do is not confirm or deny something to a newspaper to slightly edge something forward. And that almost blows up in her face too, because Thatcher almost turns it around on her.
Yeah. There's a scene earlier this season where they're getting ready. They're marching out to a garden party. And it's like Philip and Margaret and the Queen Mother grumbling.
And they're just like,
why
I
we
can't
have
believe
to
we
do
have to
this.
talk to
And
these
she's
people.
like, you remember what they taught us? And it's important to like meet the citizens. And then there's that amazing shot of them 20 feet away from anybody else in the garden party, it's completely distanced and still removed from society. And that's their continuing fight and problem.
Was the Claire Foy scene shot some other time? Or do you think that was a new scene?
I seem to remember some paparazzi. It's not like a flashback. We haven't seen it in another episode of The Crown. I seem to remember some paparazzi shots that she did that during the production of these two seasons, as opposed to the previous seasons. I was lovely. It was great to see her.
Great to have her back.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's any other 48 to 1 stuff. Oh, I guess I was just going to say, it's worth noting that like in this show, they make the Commonwealth sound like this great thing that everybody was so psyched to be a part of. And it was like a family, and that they were standing up against this sort of axis of evil that was apartheid, which apartheid was obviously unambiguously awful. But the Commonwealth and the idea of the British Empire had some inherent issues.
Yeah. And this show continues to complicate the issue. Margaret Thatcher just being like, what is this? And I don't have time for this. I don't think she's on the right side with respect to sanctions. And I don't think she's on the right side of public opinion. But just in terms of what is this organization besides a thing that the royal family made up to continue to feel important as all of its power is crumbling away. That's correct.
Yeah. So the last two episodes, I think we can talk about in a coupling, which is Avalanche and War. So, because those are essentially charting the end of Margaret Thatcher and the beginning of the end of Charles and Diana. Although Charles and Diana really never have a honeymoon on this show. You had said the last time we spoke that it's important to remember that like they had kind of met each other like a dozen times before they got married. So it's not like this was a great love affair that fell off. It was more like a propped up thing that didn't work out.
Exactly.
I can't tell whether I'm just like really impressed or there's something off-putting or what it is that I loathe Charles so much now after these two episodes, the character. And this is somebody that I was just like, after the season 3, I was just like, this is just an amazing creation. You know what I mean? Like I have so much affection for this guy and so interested in him. And I think a lot of his decay happens off screen. So that's why it might be a little confusing for me, because he's just such a fucking prick by the end of this series, this season. But you're just like, God, this guy's so different. I guess he would be though, wouldn't he? I mean, he's not a teenager anymore.
Yeah, I believe the Billy Joel dance is celebrating his 37th birthday.
Right.
And he is, so it's important to, I agree. He's a complete asshole. And I think what Josh O'Connor does in terms of unlocking like just a new level of cruelty and not indifference, but like venomous or like rage and indifference towards Diana is really upsetting and spectacular. I think you're meant to understand him as a product of everything else we've seen, right? And I think he's both a person who whose parents never liked him very much, as we've seen throughout this season and the previous, and who is put in a very weird position, not just in terms of being like heir to the throne and how strange monarchy is, but also he's just in waiting. He's not, he's only important. He's like the vice president. But he's waiting for his mom to die, which is very strange. And then everyone has been sucking up to him in his entire life. But he is the product of all of that, and then he takes the path you don't want him to take. And normally when we see these people, like in a movie, you see someone, a very tough childhood or isn't loved, but they find a way to express themselves, or they find the person who makes it better for them, or they figure out how to right the mistakes of their past. And he is not writing the mistakes. He's repeating the mistakes with a new level of venality that is quite impressive.
Yeah, and it's just completely fixated on the one thing in life that he can't have, which is Camilla. And probably allows her to become, at least in the world of the show, an outsized tragedy in his life, when in fact, almost everybody is like, not only is this not that big of a deal, but newsflash, it's pretty well known that Camilla does not feel the same way about you. Now, I don't know whether that's accurate or not, or I think those scenes between Josh O'Connor and Emerald Fennell are really cool because the language is so precise. And she does a lot of very specific, like, I am affirming this without ever like trapping myself in a place where I am going to have to leave my husband for you, because I'm like, but you're never going to leave, Diana. So that doesn't really matter. So we don't have to really address that.
Right. I think the other thing that is really interesting about the Prince Charles character is that I'm sympathetic for Diana. And I think that this show and this season has shown a lot of like her setbacks and the ways that they haven't supported her, and what a weird family it is and how cold it is. And, you know, they have showed her bulimia. I would say, I think what they've shown is sensitive. They've maybe not developed kind of her mental health struggle as much as is a factor. But I think that's possibly only because the show is not really told from her perspective. And so, but they've also pointed out that she has her flaws too. And it's not like the angel sitting across from Prince Charles that, why can't you just figure it out? I am speaking specifically of the Phantom of the Opera scene, which is a scene that is just going to haunt me for the rest of my life. Particularly because I don't like it when people sing. It just makes me really uncomfortable. And so as soon as she started singing, what I did is I pulled the blanket that I was using fully over my head, grabbed my phone, and just started texting you, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And so I didn't watch it the first time. I just listened. And then once I knew kind of the length and how much time I had to spend watching her sing Phantom of the Opera, I went back and watched it. But I mean, that scene is horrifying and like funny in a vicious sort of way, but it is also illuminating because she says, I love to perform. I love to express myself. And this is a person who not only completely misunderstands her partner, and it goes both ways a little bit. Like, he obviously doesn't understand her and hasn't tried at all, but it's not like giving someone a gift of you singing Phantom of the Opera on stage is not really a gift for the other person, if you will.
Right.
Unless that person is like the number one Andrew Lloyd Webber fan. And I'm guessing Prince Charles is not. But the other thing is that she is a person who likes attention. She likes the limelight. And they do establish that. And they establish that as Charles's other Achilles heel, as someone who has always been in the shadows and someone who really wants just like a moment to shine, to borrow a phrase from The Crown. And so he is uniquely paired with someone to bring out the worst in him. And like, again, in normal narrative storytelling, we expect people to rise above that. And he does not. He goes 100% opposite direction.
Yeah, there's a lot of montage storytelling in these last few episodes. And I think one of the probably the fastest things is the most important, the one that goes by the quickest, is essentially the trap he lays for her, which is once he doesn't get a chance to read his letter in front of Philip and Elizabeth, he essentially sets it up so that he's going to isolate Diana, not respond to her phone calls, not like basically like, you know, seal her up in another house somewhere. And then once she trips up, he's going to be like, well, you know, all bets are off now. And in between that time, I think we are led to believe that he is still seeing Camilla.
Oh, yeah, of course. He's 100% seeing Camilla. The trap's important, but we got to talk about that scene. with the summit between Diana and Charles and Philip and the Queen, which is maybe the lowest point for the Queen in the whole season, if I had to guess, because I'm curious how you interpreted Diana's reactions in that scene.
So do I see it in the way that Charles saw it?
Yeah.
I don't know, because, I felt like the avalanche part was kind of yada yada. We spent more time with worrying about Mark Thatcher getting across his car rally than we did about Charles living through that avalanche. Now, obviously, maybe that was exactly how it felt. Like it was quickly ascertained that he was not in danger and yada, et cetera. But I felt like I didn't know whether or not Diana actually was scared that Charles was going to die. I think my thought was, as she's walking into that room, she realizes what's at stake, and she realizes what she could be taken away from her if this all goes away. She's got that dynamite dress on, and she's wants to go to New York and all this stuff that's going to happen. And Charles is still the bridge to that.
I agree. And I also think she realizes she doesn't want to lose. I think that I don't know whether her feelings for Charles are genuine at this point. And what are we talking about? No one can actually know that. But in the show itself, I picked up less of, I don't want to lose this person, but I don't want to lose this war between us. Mm-hmm. And to divorce would be to hand Charles his victory, and to stay together is not only keeping everything that you just mentioned, which is very important, but also to win. And I think that's a little bit just what I picked up in Emma Corrin's performance, but it is also the other part is how quickly Olivia Colman is like, okay, great, it's settled. Philip doesn't speak. Prince Charles doesn't speak. Josh O'Connor does an amazing job of communicating his anguish and outrage without speaking. But that's a pretty unfair scene for Charles.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I do, it's not that I blame Diana, but I'm just like, oh, this is all really ugly. And then you just double down on the ugliness. So
I think that's why you end this season with kind of a sick feeling in your stomach, is because there's actually nothing you're rooting for. And, you know that they're not going to stay together and that her life is going to tragically end.
Right.
You know that he actually does wind up with Camilla. So in a weird way, he gets what he wants in the end.
Right.
You are not rooting for him to be with Camilla, but at the same time, you can see that the Diana and Charles are not right for one another. So you're sort of left confronted with disassembling what we usually go into TV shows, especially with, which is like, I need to have like a rooting interest in something or someone, or I'm watching 45 hours of The Office because I want these two people to get together. And on The Crown, you're kind of like, these people should never have met. Like that turns out he should have just kept dating Diana's sister and then dated another woman and then dated another woman until he finally fucking talked Camilla into leaving Andrew.
The other interesting thing, the TV show kind of knows this, so it tries to re-engineer you back to rooting for the Queen. Mm-hmm. And it gives her, and we're going to war now, and I don't want to step on everything else because we do also have to talk about Margaret Thatcher, but it gives her that climactic speech of finally just yelling at Charles and being like, you're both selfish. You both suck. You need to get it together. Act like a king if you want to be a king. I can't handle this anymore. And it's uncharacteristic of her. And it is, having an opinion, which even within her family, she tries not to do. But so that's not where this show ends. It gives Philip a speech, which echoes the finale 2 seasons before and the climactic fight between Matt Smith and Claire Foy. I think he uses that same, like, the essence of your duty is brought from that fight. And I think that's also an echo of episode 1 of the whole show. So it's like the whole theme, it brings it back to the Queen. And then the last shot, do you remember who it's of?
Of this season?
Yeah.
Is it not of Diana in the family picture?
It's of Diana, and it focuses on Diana, but that's just noticeable because the last 3 seasons have ended on a close-up of the Queen. Every single one. The very last scene is, I think in season 1, it's usually a photograph being taken. And again, season 2, the very last shot is of a family photograph, and they snap at everybody, and then it zooms in on the Queen. But that they finish on Diana instead is fascinating because to me, it's basically, okay, now it's going to be the Queen versus Diana. Like you're not even supposed to care about her. It's about spheres of power and this person who's going to haunt this institution and who will ultimately meet like a completely tragic death as a result of it. But it's this kind of larger than life specter. And I thought that was like a fascinating choice and like pretty chilling, but it's true. I didn't walk away from it being like, oh, goody. I was just like, oh, wow, shit is going to get really, really messy next season, which spoiler alert, it is.
And I think that they generally do, like they don't have Queen Elizabeth, fighting in the Falklands. Like this is a very realistic show. Imelda Staunton is not going to be like moving around a lot. Like they probably will do a lot with her, but it really does feel like it's going to be DeBecky's season next season.
I think it has to be. Yeah. And and that is certainly what becomes like the major story of the 90s in the royal family is. And then as Diana splits off, which spoiler alert, she does. I'm really sorry if we're spoiling history for people. It doesn't end well. But kind of the crown and the royal family trying to keep attention versus Diana being her own huge media sensation and a media sensation that was like kind of uncontrollable and ultimately did contribute to her death is the major theme. I'm very curious to see, and I don't think this will happen in season 5. I think it'll be season 6, but obviously Peter Morgan has already told part of this story. The Queen, which is an excellent film and is also on Netflix right now in case you're jonesing for more Crown content. Is about the period of time right after Diana's death and how the royal family deals with it. And he's been thematically consistent, like his thoughts on the media and Diana and how the family interacted with her. It doesn't seem like maybe they've developed, but I don't think he's really changed his perspective very much. And he uses the same hunting motif over and over again. But I'm really curious. Is he going to tell it again? Will he tell it slightly differently?
Right.
Like what has doing 5 seasons of this show taught you about this particular point in time? I don't know.
Yeah. There's a couple of things about war that I wanted to go over. First of all, shout out to parliamentary government and just like you and me just being able to be like, we have no confidence in Sean Fennessy and just replacing him on the big picture. Like it's just so amazing when they're just like, I'm kind of done with you, Margaret Thatcher. You have to like stand down. I thought that they did a really good job. I actually felt like Josh O'Connor, they did not age up Josh O'Connor and Emma Corrin particularly well. I mean, I think they did a decent job, but I thought that the way they age Margaret Thatcher was very effective. She gets increasingly more hunched over. She seems increasingly more like she doesn't have control of her face entirely. And she obviously starts to lose her grip over her emotions. And I thought that was like a fascinating sort of portrait of the thing about the crown is that it's permanent. And ultimately like these prime ministers come and go. And she says that with all of her sort of, and when she has these sort of times with the prime minister, she's like, well, I've seen 3 of you in the last 10 years, or right. And she's always there. And she does dap Margaret up with the necklace at the end, or the brooch rather.
The badge. Yeah.
But, I thought it was an incredible, I guess who's the next prime minister? Is it Major?
Yeah, I believe so. I only know that because I know that when the Charles and Diana separate, it's John Major who announces it. And then Tony Blair is in the Queen. I know all my history through Peter Morgan shows. So thank you, Peter Morgan.
Did you have anything to say about like sort of the end of Margaret and like Gillian Anderson's performance this season?
I thought she was fantastic. And I guess I don't have enough memory of real life Margaret Thatcher to have a comment on whether her voice is too much of a SNL impression versus the real thing. I just was so tickled by Olivia Colman doing her own version of it. Yeah. And just a real force. I thought they had such chemistry, and that's so interesting because we haven't really seen Elizabeth, the character, go toe to toe with a woman in any capacity. The first 3 seasons has been a woman in a man's job and dealing with all the gray-haired men yelling at her, as she references in that goodbye speech. I just continue to be shocked with how abrupt the British government can be. And it's also, she's there for 11 and a half years and then they're like, goodbye. And she has to leave tomorrow. It seems I'll never understand parliamentary procedure.
It's like you gotta move out. You gotta move out because you only won like 51-49.
It's just also like everyone woke up one day and was like, well, that's it. We're done. There were some other issues. I think, the Fagin episode was a kind of a great one episode summary of a lot of the ways in which Thatcher changed or dismantled a lot of the UK in the 80s. And from the historical perspective that you and I are more familiar with. But it is interesting that you really only got one episode and then snippets here and there. It was not a full treatise on like the socio-political impact of Margaret Thatcher in the UK in the 80s.
No, and I do wonder whether or not had they wanted to make this an 8-season show, whether there is a longer 80s treatment, whether the 80s is a season and a half or not. Well, let's talk about the fight, because I think that's obviously there's a couple of, a lot of great musical moments throughout this season. There's a lot of like very funny moments. There's some heartwarming moments, but I think the fight is going to be the takeaway scene where they just do Marriage Story.
I hug who I want.
Yeah.
I hug who I love.
And who could you be referring to? I don't know if that happened. I don't know if it happened like that. That was great writing. That was a fucking great fight. That's a Hall of Fame fight between a couple.
I mean, it is Marriage Story 2.0, and I'd like to congratulate you on your meme.
Thank you.
Which was really good. And I also want to thank you for just like sensitivity and meme sharing, which you waited until you knew I was done with the episode. And then I just got a text message from you that was just like, okay, I made something for you. And I was like, I have no idea what's about to happen. And I'd also just seen the Phantom of the Opera episode, so I was very nervous. Yeah. But it was a great meme.
Like you thought I was going to sing for you?
I mean, who can know at this point? Did you see that coming? Did you see it being a VHS tape?
No.
With her singing Phantom of the
No, and the worst
opera?
part was like the next scene is him being like, that sucked to his sister. It's just like so brutal.
Suck.
I know, but it's still brutal.
Yeah. The shot of them on the couch with him just looking in disgust is my new meme for me watching pretty much anything except for The Crown season 4. I just, in terms of historical accuracy, the Billy Joel performance definitely happened. It's a real thing.
It's on YouTube.
And but I have no idea about the Phantom of the Opera gift. I've never seen that referenced in anything. And I think
it seems too specific
writing.
To make up.
But it also seems like if she actually did perform like somewhere like on the West End, on the actual theater, and like 100 people are involved, and then all of the staffers who are around and probably could hear it in the next room because there's no privacy anywhere in the royal family, like we would know about it.
Yeah, because it would have been like.
Don't you think I would know about that?
Also, it just seems like so you just made one copy of this video of Princess Diana performing in Phantom of the Opera,
right?
I have to also shout out the 3 or 4 New Yorkers that get a cameo in like the kind of early New York 1 version of like, oh, Princess Diana, if Charles doesn't want you, we'll take you. You're a great lady. I can see why you're going to be queen. Oh, like it was just like the Crown does New York was great. But
Can
that
I also,
whole... No,
well, I was just going to say the scene after that, because we see that by Camilla watching it. Great Emerald Fennell, like smoking silently performance. And then cut to Camilla's like kitchen in her country home. The hutch with the china and the green in that particular room, just great kitchen inspiration.
I would just love to know how many days Emerald Fennell worked on this show. Because it really
Probably
feels like
3.
3. Yeah. And she it's like the same light. She's on the phone for most of it. She gets in a car once. Mm-hmm. And watches TV and smokes a lot. It just seems like the best job in the whole world.
Right. Funnily enough, I think that sort of like summarizes Camilla's relationship to Charles and the royal family for like 30 to 40 years. And one of no, I'm serious. And I think in addition to being in love with Andrew Parker Bowles and all of this stuff was like, she did not actually want to deal with all of this nonsense. Yeah. And being in the royal family is a pain, and you have no privacy, and you have to do all this stuff, and you get judged by the media, as she says in that speech. And she was like, no, thanks. I'm not interested in it. I would rather just like take some phone calls and be smoking and meet up at country houses at the weekend.
I just love how fucked up and complicated people can be. I just love that she never lets him off the hook. She obviously doesn't know that that's what he means when he's like, I'll take care of this. When she tells him like, oh, like I could never be that pretty or that loved.
Right.
and she doesn't know that she's setting him off on this sort of run that he's going to go on.
That's insane. That is like, in terms of, if we're comparing it to Marriage Story, when the Adam Driver character is like, I was young and I didn't sleep with anyone and wants credit for that, which is like an absurd thing to say. But Charles being like, you hugged an AIDS patient, a child AIDS patient, and that was really selfish of you because
we
it was
could do that
to Camilla,
too. Yeah.
is 400 times more insane and divorced from reality.
Yeah. It's also like this concept that they seem to have of each of themselves, where it's like, we need the publicity, but we also don't want to like stoop below the level that we feel like we should. Like we consider certain things beneath the sort of office that we hold, but we also really do want that attention. And Diana was like, no, I will go out and meet people. I will go out and touch people. I like it when people say nice dress. It means a lot to me. I know what to say back to them. Right.
And so she completely changes what the royal family is and does as a result of that, because now they all have to, it's not just that they do their charity work, and they've done like a tremendous amount of charity work always, but that it needs to be photographed. There needs to be something emotional about it. There needs to be, that's how it sells. And then also the fashion element and them as celebrities in the, in the Us Weekly sense, said with all respect to the Us Weekly of a decade ago, which I really enjoyed. But they didn't used to do that. They thought of themselves as kind of state figures. And Diana's success in the other arena kind of edges them off the stage to the point that they have to adopt like her strategy in order to survive.
I mean, one of my favorite episodes of the entire series is Aberfan from last year. When Elizabeth goes and visits the Welsh mining town that's had this landslide hit the school, and just an absolute tragedy. And she cannot, the whole thing is she going to cry? Like the press wants to know, the people working in the palace want to know, like, is she going to display any empathy with these people, or is she just going to walk through this town in her pink coat? And the juxtaposition of that with Diana reaching over and hugging that boy, and the way it revolts Charles is just, it's so amazing.
And reveals a lot about him. And it does seem like growing up in this institution, it doesn't seem like it's a fact that growing up in this institution just completely limits your ability to be a human and to understand other people in a way that is pretty disgusting.
It's a great fight. So what do we get next? What is your, I guess obviously Dominic West and Elizabeth Debicki are taking over as Charles and Diana. Imelda Staunton takes over as Elizabeth. Who's Philip?
Jonathan Pryce, I believe.
Oh, wow. Okay. So shout out to the show is just like, we can just cast who we want. They don't have to look exactly like.
They'll make it work.
So we get into the mid 90s now, right?
Yeah, so I think we'll start pretty soon after this. This ends in 1990, I believe. And I think we might skip to 92, but that's as far as we're going to skip, which, as you noted, they don't really age Josh O'Connor and Emma Corrin in the same way. They try with Emma Corrin's wig. And the wig is historically accurate, but it becomes more and more apparent as a wig as this season goes on.
Sure.
That's one of my notes. At some point, we're going to have to talk about TV wigs more generally, but we don't need to do it on this episode. So I think
I feel like that was a subtle shot at Grace Fraser, at Nicole Kidman's red tresses.
I honestly, those are okay. I love Anya Taylor-Joy and I love the Queen's Gambit, but one of those early wigs, it was just very clearly a wig. Okay. Yeah. And I understand that it saves time, but whatever. I think we can't start any later than 1992 because that is when the Andrew Morton book about Princess Diana that Diana cooperates with and gives interviews to behind the scenes comes out. And that is we've crossed a couple Rubicons, but that is the true Rubicon in terms of their marriage and in terms of the royal families and Diana's relationship with the press. Mm-hmm. So that'll have to be in the show. And it typically goes by prime minister. And as I mentioned, Tony Blair has just been elected when Diana dies in a car crash in 1997. So I would imagine that would be the last episode of the season. And in between, you get divorce and really humiliating press wars, including do you know about Charles and Camilla's phone sex tapes?
No. did
Okay.
not.
I will let you Google that on your own time. I don't want to spoil that for people, but
Shout out to my algorithm. Yeah.
Yeah. That'll happen. And the boys become older and they're not involved, but the kind of the war of where they are and who they're allegiant to, which gets really sticky and sad.
Yeah.
So a lot of Diana stuff. I wish I should know about like British history in the 90s, but I don't really until Tony Blair gets elected.
I'm just excited for Blur and Oasis to make cameos if possible. It's been such a pleasure talking about this show with you. We'll do it again next season. And yeah, we're going to have this as a special episode so people can listen to our entire conversation, which I think now is like 2 hours long, about The Crown season 4. Thank you so much, Amanda.
Thank you, Chris.